سلام لخ مريم مليف طيبوثة نارا عماخ مريخات المشي وموريخ بير خرسي شو ناط مريم يلدت آلها صلح لا بين حطاي هاشا وشاف الموثين آمين.
Bueno, me llamo Antonio Aurelio.
My name is Antonio Aurelio. I am a Trinitarian religious priest. I belong to the Order of the Most Holy Trinity. My order was born in 1198. The founder was a French priest. In his first Mass, he had a vision. He saw Christ freeing Christian and Muslim slaves. Remember, this is during the time period of the Crusades. After this, he founded a religious order to free slaves. So we can say that the charism of the order is the charism of freedom. I am very attracted to the ideal of freedom. Not the freedom we have in Europe and in the West, not just religious freedom, but the freedom that is, I believe, the greatest gift that God has given to humanity. He hasn't given us life and reality, because if this church were to fall right now, we wouldn't be able to do anything. Our life would end. Our life doesn't depend on us, but our freedom does always depend on us. Freedom is the decision to choose between good and evil, to choose between helping or not helping, selfishness or self-giving. The true meaning of Christianity is freedom. That's what attracted me towards the Trinitarian order.
De los Trinitarios. Nosotros los Trinitarios.
The Trinitarians have an association within the order called Trinitarian International Solidarity, which is totally dedicated to persecuted Christians. It is not a social association dedicated to culture and development. Their only goal is to help persecuted Christians. In reality, this is the origin of the Trinitarian charism, the origin of our foundation. So our efforts are realized in two main ways. On the one hand, we offer our support in concrete circumstances. For example, right now in Syria and Iraq, in countries that are in a particular situation of war or extremist persecution. We are not present as a community, but we are present through our projects. We have been working in Syria, in the diocese of Aleppo in Syria, and right now we're working on a project to finance schools in Aleppo. It might seem like this project isn't very important or isn't necessary given the war that's going on in Syria. But when we asked the diocese what its most urgent needs were to start a project, they didn't ask for help for families, food, blankets, etc. No, the first thing they asked for was schools. Why? Because there weren't any schools left. The schools had been bombarded. They didn't exist. And no one could pay the teachers, so the teachers had to find a different way to make a living to take care of their families, which is normal. So many boys were on the streets, wandering, begging. They had no future. So in these circumstances, the Islamic State, Daesh, was capturing them. They gave the boys and young men money and women to convince them to join the Islamic State. So many young men were being lost. So the most urgent need was to open schools. We had to repair the schools that could be repaired, or rent spaces that could work as classrooms, and pay the teachers, even if at a basic salary. That way, the boys could go back to school and stay off the streets. We also give financial support to 250 families for food, blankets, etc. throughout the year. We have projects in Iraq as well. We support the Dominican sisters who take care of the children who are now orphans because of the war. We recently began another project in Syria, in a town called Malula. It's a small Christian city, majority Christian. Aramaic is still spoken there, the language of Jesus Christ. But the Islamic State took the city. There was a monastery of Orthodox nuns, and all 16 of them were captured, and Daesh had them kidnapped for 4 months. When Daesh left, the city was destroyed, totally destroyed. There are a lot of videos on the internet of domes and churches. I don't know if you've seen them before, and soldiers from the Islamic State are pulling down the cross from the dome. Well, that is in Malula. We had the privilege of entering for the first time. No one had entered before because the Islamic State had just been driven out, and the people have begun to return. But before fixing their own houses, they started to fix the monastery, because for them, the monastery is the center of their lives, of their faith, of their belief, of their identity. So the first thing they did was start to fix the monastery. We also wanted to help them. So we opened a fundraising campaign to restore the houses of these Christians. That way, they will be able to return. We did a study with architects and technicians, and it's going to cost an average of 5,000 euros to rebuild each house after the bombings. So we're working on these campaigns to support our projects. We hope that this ancient Christian city, the monasteries from the 3rd century, can be inhabited again soon. These are the projects we support, although we are not present there. But the Trinitarian family, the priests and the sisters, are present in China, in small secret communities. They cannot show that they are religious brothers or sisters in any way. We are present in the Middle East, in countries in which Christianity is forbidden. In those cases, we are present not as communities because we cannot live a community life. 2 or 3 men or 2 or 3 women living together, each leading his or her own life, would seem very strange for these people and would raise suspicion. So these Trinitarians who have opted for community life cannot live their community life, but they decide to be close to the persecuted Christians. They live separately. That way, if the police comes, they won't be found all together and be arrested at the same time. If one is discovered, only one is arrested. That's how we are present in these countries. We are also present in India. The current government in India is passing very harsh laws against Christians, and we do have communities there. The Superior General of the Trinitarians is from India. We have communities, and we are working there with persecuted Christians. My experience in Syria was very shocking. In what sense? Syria was known as the Switzerland of the Middle East, and it's true. People who walked through the streets of Damascus said it felt like they were walking through the streets of Europe. Although it was majority Muslim, there wasn't the chaos and abandonment that exists in most, though not all, Muslim countries. Syria was very well taken care of, and there were good relationships between Christians, Shiites, Sunnis, etc. Now, the situation is the exact opposite. There are huge masses of bombarded buildings. Only their walls are left standing. The streets are deserted because the people have fled. Those who have remained are only there because they had no other choice. What's left is a ghostly feeling. You go from one city to the next, and there are constantly military checkpoints. We were able to go to these cities because of the current government, not the rebels, not the Islamic State. But even though the government is present, there are still car bomb attacks. When I was in Damascus, over 100 people died in a car bomb attack. When I was in Homs, another 40 people died in a different car bomb attack. So even though the rebels and the Islamic State aren't present in any direct way, there is still death and chaos. The same thing happens in Damascus. To go from one neighborhood to the next, There are constant military checkpoints to see if you have bombs or weapons in your car. So the situation is totally different from 5 years ago. And in this situation, people are trying to deal with it the best they can. People are trying to find food to eat because there's scarcity. Often there's no electricity, there's no water. Sometimes in the middle of Mass, the electricity goes out. So we have to finish Mass in the dark. Or you're doing something else and the light goes out, so you have to start putting candles all over the place. People are trying to get used to it, but that's also problematic. When we get accustomed to what is not good, it's a problem because we have to keep working to avoid these circumstances and these situations. But they have no other choice. The people feel very abandoned by Europe and the West. In reality, the problems in Syria were caused by the West. Europeans are so worried about the refugees in Europe, but no one remembers those who are suffering the war under the bombs and the gunshots. We only care about the refugees, maybe because they're closer to us, maybe because they affect us and have consequences in our own cities. But no one remembers that the cause of this movement of refugees is the war that still exists and continues in these countries, in Syria and Iraq. So, to avoid all these situations of refugees, what we have to do is bring peace to Syria, peace to Iraq. The refugees would return to their homes. The unanimous cry of the Syrian people is that they don't want to leave their homes. So now, having visited Syria, I realize what the most urgent needs are. And the most urgent needs in Syria is peace. Because without peace, it's impossible to rebuild the city. The houses cannot be fixed, the streets cannot be repaired, and the hospitals and schools cannot be reopened. The first priority is peace. But no one is talking about peace in the West. We only talk about the refugees, who's coming, who can come. But no one is talking about peace. In this movement of war, in this situation of the refugees, we receive our information from the mass media, from the Western mass media. That is, the mass media of the countries that have created this entire situation. But the information they present to us is not true. It's not true. Starting with the information about the president, al-Assad. It's evident. Look at any documentation about Syria from 5, 6, or 7 years ago. If that president is really the way they say he was, this shouldn't have happened. Rather than in Syria, it would have happened in another Islamic country with a more evident dictatorship. But no one talks about this in Syria. What, does a person just change from one day to the next into an entirely different person? I think that in the West, we have to realize how manipulated the information from the mass media is. And the mass media is influenced by this government in the West. We have to realize that all the difficulties, the wars, the problems right now, always exist in Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia. I have to make this clear. Saudi Arabia is behind most of these wars. However, no one ever says it because there are so many interests in the West. In Syria, for example, Saudi Arabia and Turkey are behind it all, using the war for their own interests. Israel wants to make sure that the countries close to it aren't powerful and strong. The Israelis want these countries to be divided and weak. If Israel is interested, the United States is right behind, because they go hand in hand. The United States is in Israel. Israel is in the United States. That's the way it is. Everyone knows it. So the crisis going on in Syria is not an internal crisis. The current situation, the conflict in Syria, was caused by all the interests just mentioned. So we hear what they want us to hear. And I, who just came back from Syria, have to say that it is not true.
Siria, tengo que decir que no es verdad. Bueno, las discriminaciones podemos ver
We
también.
can see discrimination in all Muslim countries, not just Syria. There is discrimination in the rest of the Muslim countries as well. In Iraq, for example, Christians cannot have passports. Why? Because they're not protected by the law. They're not Muslims, and therefore they have no rights. In most Muslim countries, there's a theocratic government, and only Muslims have rights. If you're not a Muslim, you have no rights. Why? Because Muslims think that everyone was born Muslim. All of us were born Muslim. As soon as you stop being a Muslim, you yourself have automatically rejected the rights that are proper to Muslims. God created everyone a Muslim, so you are outside of those rights and therefore you have no rights. A few weeks ago, Angela Merkel said that those who are not legally recognized cannot receive a visa. This means Christians. It's all part of the same problem. So there is discrimination. There is a lot of discrimination. Keep in mind that there is no inter-religious dialogue in any Muslim country. Inter-religious dialogue only exists in the West. In other words, there is no majority Muslim country that has dialogue with other religions. There's only dialogue between Islam and other religions when Muslims are a minority. And that's the way it is. Saudi Arabia, for example, has created a center for interreligious dialogue in Brussels, I believe. It was financed by Saudi Arabia, but never within Saudi Arabia. They had to create it outside the country. So the discrimination of Christians is evident in Muslim countries. They're always discriminated, always. That's always the case. If you're a Christian, you can't even work as a street cleaner if that job depends on the government. You have no rights in your own country.
We
can say that Islam is the religion of the book. Why? Because the Quran is the book that was written directly by God and given to us. So it cannot be touched. What is written there must be enough for your entire life, for all eternity. It was written in the 7th century in a specific historical context, but Islam does not advance. Why not? Because given that it was written directly by God, there cannot be interpretations, in that it differs from the Bible. When you study theology, one of the subjects that you have to take is historical criticism. You have to do a historical critique of the Bible to find the essence. I mean critique in a constructive sense, not a negative sense. In Islam, you cannot do a historical critique of the Quran. That's why Islam never advances. In the Quran, many different things are said. It speaks of war and it speaks of peace, but the majority of the time it speaks of war and the minority of peace. So each Muslim pays attention to what he wants. There is no head of the Muslim religion who can give some basic criteria about how to behave. In Catholicism, we have the Pope who gives us those basic criteria. That doesn't exist in Islam. The Islamic State is fulfilling what the Quran says. They're not just crazy people. They go around with the Quran in hand. Maybe some men joined the Islamic State because they were looking for violence and action, but the foundation is in the Quran. The same is true for the other side. Muslims who want to work for peace can use the Quran. And, for example, the Islamic State, and for more radical and orthodox Muslims, if a Muslim welcomes a Christian or speaks to a Christian, he is going against Islam. And they're right, because that's what the Quran says. So that violence can be part of the essence of Islam if they take it to be the essence. And we can't contradict that. We have to try to help them to take peace to be more a part of the essence than war and destruction. But I repeat, what is happening with ISIS, Daesh, or the Islamic State is based on concrete texts of the Quran. moderate Muslims do exist. Normally, they are simple people, Muslims who see Christians and live near Christians, and they realize that Christians are open. They go to the hospitals run by Christians. The hospitals in these Muslim countries are sometimes run by religious brothers or sisters because Christians can't go to public hospitals. So the religious congregations have had to open hospitals to attend the Christians, but not just the Christians. In Syria and Iraq, in the situations that are taking place right now, even Muslims go to these hospitals. Why? Because they are welcomed and received well. I remember the testimony of a young Muslim man whose younger sister was treated in one of these Christian hospitals, and he ended up asking to convert to Christianity. He said, "We're persecuting these people, and they welcome us with open arms. They don't ask us what religion we belong to or what our profession is, but they welcome us because we are in need." And through their relationship with Christians, they realize the bravery of the Christians. But it's not all like this. There is a lot of extremism. When I was taking Islamic studies in Egypt, I had a young Muslim professor. He was a professor of Islamic philosophy, ancient and contemporary Islamic philosophy. And since he was a strong thinker, he was aware of many things, and he had more advanced ideas than current Islam. He had to leave Egypt because he was forbidden from giving conferences and writing books because he was too advanced for the Islamic tradition that existed in Cairo. This unfortunate extremism is the cause of the tensions between Muslims and other religions. Another professor I had was named Aisha. She taught us Arabic. She always came dressed normally, without a veil. But after a couple of months, we saw her wearing the veil. And we asked, "Hey, Aisha, you put the veil on. Do you prefer it now?" And she said, No, but my family and my neighbors are pressuring me, saying, "Why aren't you wearing a veil? Why aren't you wearing it?" So I put it on so they'll leave me alone. In Madagascar, there are many Muslims coming in from Islamic countries, and they are paying women the corresponding salary of 1 month of work just for wearing a veil. So now, there are tons of women with veils in Madagascar, even those who are not Muslims. They do so because they're paid. It's a way for Islam to enter, penetrate, and invade other cultures and other religions. That is a type of extremism. But unfortunately, it is the same extremism that moves everything, because it is an extremism that is based on oil interests, based on the world economy. That is what is moving extremism in the rest of the countries.
En los demás países.
Seeing all of this, we realize that the current situation is a consequence of this extremism. This extremism was created by countries like Saudi Arabia, which is always at the origin of this. A few weeks ago, Angela Merkel asked Saudi Arabia for help for the refugees. And Saudi Arabia responded that they were already prepared to build 500 mosques in Germany. Saudi Arabia promotes extremism. Every mosque that exists in the world was built by Saudi Arabia. Every Quran that exists in the world is published by Saudi Arabia. So it is a type of invasion that Western countries cannot oppose. Why not? Because they all depend upon loans and guarantees from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia caused this situation. Turkey as well. Turkey is going to be given $6 billion for receiving the refugees there, and their doors will be opened for Turkey to become part of Europe. So without doing anything, they're getting what they want. They have created these circumstances of refugees, and they take advantage of the situation for their own benefit. So these movements in these countries have created the situation. supported by Israel, obviously. Israel does not want strong Islamic countries to neighbor it. It is also supported by the United States. And there's also an internal problem. It would be too much to go into it right now. It is the war and confrontation that has always existed throughout history between Sunnis and Shiites. They are irreconcilable. So countries like Saudi Arabia take advantage of this and create division in strongholds that will inevitably collapse and fall apart, so that Saudi Arabia will always be on top.
Arabia Saudita la que se mantenga en cabeza de todo. Ahora cuando he vuelto, por ejemplo,
I just came back from Malula, Syria, a Christian town. For these Christians, their faith is a part of them. I can't decide about whether or not I want to have an arm. My arm is mine. It's a part of me, and it's useful to me. I need it, and this arm is a part of my identity. The same is true for the faith. There is no circumstance that can make me renounce my faith, because no circumstance can make me renounce myself. My faith is a part of me. That is how they live their faith. I came across two stories that show this clearly. A very elderly Iraqi woman was in her house. The Islamic State entered with gunshots. Her husband came forward to open the door, and the soldiers of the Islamic State said, "Either convert to Islam or we kill you." And he said, "No, I'm a Christian," and they killed him. So the elderly woman had to run away and hide, and later on, Christians came in a car and said, "Come on, we have to leave, they're taking the city." And they found her and fled together. In Malula, we were always accompanied by the military because ISIS was just a few kilometers away. One of the soldiers told us that some of his fellow soldiers were taken by the Islamic State. And ISIS said to them, "Either convert to Islam or we kill you." And they said, "We're Christians. We can't convert to Islam because we're Christians." And so they were killed. The faith is something totally their own, personal. It's not optional. It's essential. And so they live their faith as a guarantee of life. We want to help them rebuild their houses because they forget about their own houses and start to rebuild the monastery in their town, in their city, because that is what gives them their identity, their strength, their unity. So their sense of faith, their faith life, is very different from ours.
Un sentido de vida, de fe, muy diferente al nuestro. Para terminar, sí quisiera que...
So to conclude, I would encourage all of those who are listening to us to be faithful to their vocation as Christians. Be sincere about showing your faith. Serve others because the church is service, and express that you are Christian through your works. Christ was known for the works he did, for the miracles, for helping the sick, the widows, for his works. So we should also be known for our works. People should be able to recognize us. We shouldn't be hidden. We should show ourselves. When we see what is going on in these other countries, the wars, the persecutions, we should say it. But they're not going to listen to us. Well, maybe they won't listen, but at least they will know that we know about it. That's important. When governments realize that we're not fools, that we realize what's going on, and we tell others, even if they don't listen to us, there will be a change. They will see that we're not sitting back in our own ignorance. So we should talk about this. We should support organizations that promote Christian values, be it religious or lay organizations. We should unite ourselves to all these organizations that support persecuted Christians, that support all of those who are suffering and who cannot express their faith. that are working hard for equality and freedom of religion. The only way for different cultures to be able to live in peace is freedom of religion. As long as freedom of religion does not exist in these countries, religion will be used to cause wars and hostility. We have to insist that freedom of religion be present in every country in the world. If there is freedom of religion, there will not be persecution due to beliefs, faith, or a certain religion.
O por una religión concreta.